It's really my pleasure. I am a president of Institute of Human Thoughts, and together with Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister Cheng, we just organized that meeting. And it's really great, that you had opportunity to come, especially all great ambassadors. We have many, embassies represented today. I would like to say that around 35 embassies responded positively. Many of them were not able to come because, of the different, appointments before we announced. And we sent invitation to around 50 embassies. So basically all countries in Europe, because this debate is basically about the community of European nations. This is not debate about the European Union, but we would like to ask the question, how we can, develop the community of nations, how we can cooperate, how we can build the relationships. So there will be a much time today to talk about this all different things. And I just would like announce as well that Institute of Human Thought, together with particular embassies, Norway, for instance, Hungary, Turkey, Germany, we would like next quarterly meetings talking about the community of European nations from the perspective of Robert Schuman. We would like discuss and sit down to think how different treasures, how different, features of a particular nations are speaking about the value which Robert Schuman presented, which Robert Schuman wanted to indicate in his idea. So again, thank you very much. We have in our meeting today, of course, now we'll talk Minister Szczęch, and next will be a minister from the office of the President of Polish Republic of Poland. And we have really, thank you very much indeed that the, President, is interested as well, in that. Things, important things, to develop the relationship from the perspective of the Robert Schuman Thoughts relationship between all countries in Europe. So, Wisłomka, Minister, the floor is yours, right? Let's say that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for invitation, Mr. Professor, distinguished guest. Can I take a seat first? Thank you so much. Excellencies, dear guests, first I would like to welcome all distinguished guests to the premises of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. My special words of acknowledgement to the Professor Zbigniew Krysiak, the president of the Institute of Human Thoughts, for coming up with this very timely initiative to discuss the original concept underpinning the integration of our continent, so as to provide guidance to how the future of the European continent may or should look. This is a very particular moment in the history of the European integration, as you will all know. The consequences of the financial and economic crisis are still felt in many corners of the European Union. Confidence that the European Union can be a useful tool to solve concerns expressed by its members and citizens has yet to be fully restored. The single market, the cornerstone of the EU, with its 4 intertwined freedoms, is not complete, and some of its pillars are threatened. Question of democratic legitimacy of the EU's discussion making has yet to be addressed in a more profound way. Only a week ago, one of the EU's biggest member states, the United Kingdom formally commenced talks on its withdrawal from the European Union. On top of that, the I'm sorry, it's a terrible word for Polish. Volatility of the Europeans' neighborhood remains a source of concerns, with all its tangible consequences for us inside, like the challenge of migratory pressure. The put differently, we should start thinking out of the box about the European integration if it is to flourish in the 21st century as we all wish it does. Going back to the original vision of Europe, designed by Robert Schuman, may prove a lot more than an exercise in history of European integration. It may prove a valuable source of inspiration for the debate also on its future, as the ambition of the Polish government is clear that the reform and well-functioning European Union is in Poland's interest. I look forward to the outcomes of your today's deliberation and wish you a fruitful exchanges of view. Thank you for your attention.
Yes, now the minister from the President Office, please, floor is yours. Mark.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I will be sitting as well. This is the idea of Robert Schuman coming closer to the topic of today's meeting is quite vivid, but is quite long-standing. If we look back into the past, from Polish perspective at least, at the end of the 10th century and the beginning of the 9th century, there was an empire of Holy Rome, Otto III, who had quite similar idea, basically, to have a three pillars of Europe, being Franco, German and Slav countries, without conquering them, but to join forces in spreading the Christianity, what was essentially European idea at this time. And so over this 1,000+ years, we witness constantly trials to build deep understanding and cooperation between European nations. It was very difficult, and the history of Europe is full of blood and wars and so on, but still there was always a group of visionary politicians who were trying to build understanding between the European nations. And after the Second World War, with Robert Schuman and other visionary politicians, there was a critical mass reached by those who favored cooperation, and the 60 years, or even more, 70 years ago, more or less, European Union was created as a platform for cooperation between independent countries. And this is exactly what is lies deep in the heart of our President of Republic of Poland, is strengthening the cooperation between the independent countries in this European Union platform. But also without melting the identity of each of the country. The as the saying says, the spice of the life lies in the diversity, and exactly in the diversity of different European countries is the essence of the European Union. And as a simple economist, I look forward to today's debate to learn more from the experts and from the discutant, the people who take part in discussions, sorry, I cannot pronounce it, how the Robert Schuman idea is vivid in the political science and in the legal systems. So thank you very much for inviting me and for organizing this valuable conference.
Thank you very much, and please send our great wishes to the President of Poland. Okay, thank you very much indeed. So just a technical information, at 12 o'clock we'll have a break, a coffee break. So it's a little bit later than we initially planned. And on the fourth floor there will be a conference press. So conference, we have some journalists and they have for sure many questions. So on the fourth floor there is a room, I think, for 17. And I think I would appreciate for that conference invite as well our guest ambassadors or representative of the embassies. So be some kind to be, willing to, if you want to join us. So thank you very much indeed, and we now start with the first introductory, let's say, kind of a speech. So Andrzej Filipiak is an expert for the Institute of Schuman Thought, will introduce you to that, our mainframe and the topic about the community of the European nations according to the Schumann's view. Please, so floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Krysiak. Perhaps it will be easier if it will be better visible. Is it okay now? Okay. Excellencies, ambassadors, ministers, members of parliament, and distinguished guests. It is my honor today to, on the behalf of Institute of Schumann's Thought, to present what I believe would be a kind of introduction to the fruitful and creative and interesting discussion. First, I would like to explain a particular word which was used in the very title of this presentation and this introduction, and I mean Commonwealth. Probably the word community would be better, but the word Commonwealth is, dear to probably all Poles who deal in the Polish history of the medieval and early modern period. And I want to kind of give this a bit of the Polish perspective in the beginning. The word Commonwealth, now associated mostly with the British Commonwealth, in Old English, it simply means the Republic. And in the English literature, in the literature about Poland, or Polish history, in English language, this word is used to describe the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which I believe is a kind of good idea to start with talking about European integration. And very briefly, just as a kind of digression which may introduce us to the topic, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth lasted longer than any other political union in European history, over 400 years, of course in different forms, in different legal institutional forms. So it was a very successful endeavor in European history. Well, it was basically a consensual, republican, decentralized, multinational and religiously plural community. inhabited by many nations. Poles, Ruthenians, Lithuanians, Jews. In fact, the Jewish community was the largest community in the world, living in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. But also Germans, Armenians, Tatars. The Commonwealth was comprising different cultures and religions: Latin Catholic, Greek Catholic, Orthodox Christian, Protestant, Jewish, Muslim, Armenian, and was destroyed only by the conquest of the three neighboring absolutist powers. And this is important to kind of stress that the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a republican endeavor, yes, and it was kind of, it ended its life with the conquest of the three neighboring absolutist powers. Okay, so probably we will concentrate from now on the word community, because the word community was used by Robert Schuman, and probably it better describes the idea of what Schuman had in mind. But this short digression about the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, probably it's a good topic for another meeting to develop this idea. It's the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is a kind of model for European integration. In current discussions about European integration, it seems, at least on the surface, it seems that the discussion concentrates on institutional and formal legal aspects. How much integration in terms of institutions, yes? Whether the European integration should take form of a very, very deep integration of a federation, or rather confederation, perhaps just an international organization, or altogether a mix, some kind of mix of these three. Our thesis, basic thesis in the Institute, is that these different visions of a united Europe, first of all, if we want to understand them, first of all, they have substantive, what can be called in different language, philosophical or ideological. I don't like this word in this context, but perhaps it's also necessary here, and not formal character. Each vision assumes a set of basic convictions about the human person, about political community, as well as about Europe as a cultural and civilizational concept. And this is our kind of starting point. Yes, if we want to, in a way, go deeper than just the institutional discussion, the just legal formal aspects of integration, because it's, in our view, it's not possible to understand much if we just concentrate on this institutional aspect, which is necessary, especially in current international relations and current foreign policy. But for the discussion like this, kind of intellectual debate, the roots, philosophical, substantive differences, the character of these different visions of seem to be much more interesting. And we believe that what we can observe today in Europe is that there are two perspectives which dominate the discourse, or two visions, the federalist vision and the nationalist vision. Of course, it may seem that the nationalist vision is marginal. Yes, it may surprise you that we suggest that we have, in fact, clash of these two visions. However, in our view, the nationalist vision is not marginal. Yes, it is believed to be marginal by the European elites. But in fact, if we look at nations of Europe, at the broad populations of European countries and nations, this nationalist vision is clearly very important, and it's an most vocal, most visible alternative to the federalist vision. And before I go to Robert Schumann's vision, which I believe we believe in an institute, it's an alternative to both. Let me say it at the very beginning. Robert Schumann's vision, what I would call the communitarian vision, in contrast to the federalist or to the nationalist vision. What I would call the communitarian vision is an alternative to these two kind of dominant paradigms. So I will briefly discuss each of these dominant visions, and then I will try to show Robert Schumann's idea in contrast to both of them. I think it will be a most fruitful way of proceeding. So the federalist vision. Again, a word of explanation. When we say federalist vision, it does not necessarily mean that every proponent of this vision wants a European federation in the institutional form. Okay? Or that every person advocating or believing in a federalist vision necessarily wants Europe to become, in the near future, institutional federation. This is one remark. Second remark, this is of course an ideal type. As we know, in real life there are no ideal types. So perhaps certain aspects of this vision are sharpened, are shown in a clear, perhaps radical way. But this is done in order for us to understand the differences. So let me start with very briefly with this discussion of the basic principles of fundamentals of the federalist vision. And the first is what we call ideological secularism. In some context, the French word laïcité would be probably equivalent to what we mean by ideological secularism. What is ideological secularism? Very briefly, it's an attitude or it's a belief that religion as such, in a European context, especially Christianity, and especially organized religion, is inherently problematic from the point of view of the organization of society, of a nation, of a state, and of European integration in the broadest perspective. It's inherently problematic, and this is an attitude of perhaps hostility is a bit too stronger, because it's not always hostility, but a kind of distance, verging on hostility toward the public presence of religion, in the presence of religion in the public square. So there is a belief that there is no place for a religion, especially for institutionalist religion, in public life. Okay? Please understand me well what I mean. I just want to make a diagram to show what I mean. If this is a public square, okay, if what is inside the circle is public square, we have their state understood in the narrow sense of the government, and there's the question about the place of religion in this public square. In an ideological secularist approach, religion is outside of the public square, so somewhere here in the private sector. Okay, so outside of the public sphere. Okay, let me proceed. The second basic fundamental belief, principle of the federalist vision is what we call cosmopolitanism. Of course, there are different definitions of cosmopolitanism. In this context, what we mean is ideology which believes that cultural, especially national differences between people have no real meaning or have no real significance. That they are superficial, they are just on the surface, that basically in a European context we are more or less the same. We are all Europeans more than members of particular nations. Yes, so national identity is treated as something secondary, superficial, unimportant. The paradox is that this cosmopolitan vision also claims something opposite at the same time. The opposite claim is that these national identities, on the one hand, as I said just before, they are superficial, insignificant. On the other hand, and here's the contradiction, they are so dangerous and they are so conflict-provoking that they should be somehow contained. Okay, this is a paradox of the two claims, and in fact at the same time, insignificance of national identities, cultural, deep, strong cultural identities, and at the same time the fear that those national identities will lead to conflict, violence, and war. It may strike you as two contradictory claims at the same time, but this is what cosmopolitanism seems to be. Okay, the next is the understanding of democracy. We claim that in the federalist vision there is just the understanding of democracy is purely formal. That there is a kind of lip service played to democracy, but in fact democracy is treated with suspicion. Democracy is treated as dangerous. Democracy is treated as potentially building up conflict and pitting people against nations, against each other. So there is a conviction that in particular nations, countries, but also on the European level, it should be the elites which should govern. That we can see it currently in the discussions in the European Union. Then there is I believe most people agree on that there is what is called the democratic deficit. Yes, that's how it's called, democratic deficit in the European Union. We claim that it's not just accidental, that this democratic democratic deficit is not just a matter of institutions, of not providing proper institutional solutions. It's a deep, it's the consequence of a certain philosophy, of a certain vision. Yes. That is why I called this formal democracy, that in fact, we in fact have a de facto oligarchy, not democratic approach, but in this federalist vision, but an oligarchic approach. The next important aspect is the understanding of civil liberties, which seem to be the basic of what we call the European civilization. Or the achievement, the basic fundamental achievement of the European civilization. Civil liberties in the federalist vision, in our view, are limited, and they are limited or constrained in many ways, in the way which seem to be more and more dangerous for freedom. And we mean basic civil liberties: freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. It seems that certain views, certain religious and not necessarily religious convictions are being more and more censored. Or limited and restricted. People's freedom to express their conscience, their views, their beliefs are constrained, are limited. That's what this federalist vision seems to imply. Solidarity, the next very important value, which I believe this is something which probably everyone agrees on, that solidarity as such is a very important value for European integration, if not the basic value. Solidarity in the federalist vision is understood as, first of all, the stress, the emphasis is put upon solidarity between, or solidarity of supranational elites, first of all, and within what can be called pan-European oligarchy. Yes, so members of these elites feel more solidarity with one another than, for example, with the excluded members of their own nations, yes, or marginalized groups, for example, in their own nations. There is more solidarity between the understanding of solidarity is more. There is more solidarity between the elites on the European level than solidarity of the national elite with the people, with the especially deprived, marginalized groups of their own nations or countries. And the last principle, the fundamental conviction, I will not devote much time. That doesn't. We all know and what it means. Uniformization. Yes, the tendency, a kind of tendency to uniformize. Yes, a kind of fear of their colorfulness, richness, diversity of different European cultures. Yes. And a tendency to uniform, to impose certain uniform standards, not just, which is obvious, standards such as the rule of law and freedom and democracy. This is, everyone agrees on, but the cultural standards, the same standards in economy, in culture, in social life. There is this kind of urge or this kind of the drive towards this the uniformizing spirit, I would say, or the uniformizing mind behind this. Okay, so this would be more or less the federalist vision. Let me once again emphasize that this is an ideal type. Yes, in real life we rarely have so pure, let's say, pure ideological systems. Okay, now let's move to the nationalist vision, which seems to be in direct opposition to the federalist vision. And which seems to dominate the discourse at the moment in Europe. Now, if not on the level of the elites, at least on the level of mass populations of European countries. And the first precept would be fundamentalism. It does not have to be religious fundamentalism. Sometimes it is religious fundamentalism. Sometimes it is not religious fundamentalism. You can have a secular fundamentalism. Or fundamentalism understood as a kind of rigid doctriner adherence to the doctrine. It does not have to be a religious doctrine. Sometimes it is a religious doctrine, maybe a religious doctrine. Okay, nationalism is again, in a similar way, when I was talking about cosmopolitanism, federalist vision, I described an ideology. The same applies here. Nationalism understood as an ideology which puts one's own nation at the and the interest of one's nation as postulates that the interests of one's nations are absolutely most important. There is kind of absolutization of the nation and its interests. It does not have to be chauvinism, yes? It does not have to entail hate of other nations, but very often it does entail some kind of resentment towards other nations, or believe that you can serve your nation at the expense of other nations, that you are not obliged to solidarity with other nations, because the priority of the absolutization of this priority of national interest. So the next point would be what it may be understood in the Polish context for the Polish guests better than for foreign. National democracy. Another word which could be used here is populism, and I understand what we understand here by populism is a kind of plebiscitary democracy where the rule of law is not necessarily very important. Very often this is the democracy which treats the nation as a kind of unity, as a kind of whole, which is in the direct communication with some kind of the leader of the nations, very often charismatic leader of the nation, in order not to make current examples. Let me give a historical example. That would be, for example, that would be the idea believed in and popularized by Charles de Gaulle in the beginning of the French Fifth Republic. Yes, the parliament was not really viewed upon. The parliament was not really viewed upon as a basic institution, democratic institution, but the direct communication of a kind of charismatic leader representing the nation with the nation directly. Yes. Okay. In the nationalist vision, civil liberties also tend to be limited or constrained. This time is the civil liberties are limited to constrained not necessarily by kind of dominant ideology of like in the federalist vision, the dominant ideology would be differently called multiculturalism, political correctness, progressive liberalism, whatever. I don't want to go into detail. The civil liberties are limited to constraint. There is a tendency, at least, to limit or constrain the freedom of the people and freedoms of the people by what's called the national interest, because the national interest has this absolutist status, yes, and sometimes by the dominant or established religion as well, yes, which seems to be more important than at least some freedoms or liberties of the people. Okay, solidarity is understood primarily as a solidarity within nations. Okay, so it does not necessarily have to exclude solidarity between nations, but they are secondary. Yes, the first understanding of solidarity is that the feeling of solidarity, the practice of solidarity should be most of all primarily within a nation, particular nation. Okay, and an interesting thing here, diversity, how diversity is understood in a nationalist vision. Diversity across the nations, yes. Nations should be different. Nations should follow their tradition, their customs, their religions, their cultures. But there is a deep suspicion towards diversity within a nation. Yes, nation which a nation should be a unity, a whole. Yes, every kind of diversity, difference, cultural, religious differences within the nations are viewed with the suspicion and in this nationalist vision. Okay, I juxtaposed the two visions in order. I would not hide this. This is my conviction. So there are similarities. They may be in clash. They may be in conflict nowadays in Europe, but they share many similarities. They are very similar on a deeper level. Fundamentalism, I believe, is typical for both. In fact, we have in a federalist vision what is called secularist fundamentalism, a kind of doctrinaire, rigid approach. In a nationalist vision, we will have, for example, religious fundamentalism. But both of these are fundamentalist approaches. Both of these are ideologies. I already stressed this. Both of these are ideological approaches, and in a moment I will try to argue that this is one of the basic problems with these approaches, that they are ideological because ideologies are non-negotiable. You cannot compromise in a way on ideologies. So both of them have the vision of limited democracy in different. Yes, and in a federalist vision, this will be what I can call oligarchic limitation on democracy. In the nationalist vision, I would argue it would be a populist limitation on democracy. But both of these approaches are kind of suspicious towards democracy. Limited civil liberties, again, a similarity. Civil liberties tend to be limited or constrained differently by different things. Yes, in one case it's a dominant or established ideology, a kind of quasi-religion. In a second vision, it would be a national interest or an established traditional religion. Okay. Again, limited solidarity. Yes, in the first case, this solidarity in the federalist vision is the solidarity of the elites. In the second case, it's a solidarity just within a nation, within one particular nation. In both cases, there is this limited, constrained concept of solidarity. And another similarity between these two approaches, uniformization. In a federalist vision, we have across-the-board vision of uniformization, across the nation, within the nations, while in the nationalist vision, this uniformization is within a particular nation, which is believed in. Okay, now let me move to an alternative to these two things. That our claim would be we are not doomed. Yes, this is really problematic. The growing clash between these two visions is really problematic for Europe. Even if some European elites won't admit this, yes, and would pretend that there is no problem. There is a problem. There is a growing clash between these two visions, potentially catastrophic for Europe, but for the project of European integration. So we at least should try to find solutions. And we believe that the original vision of Robert Schuman, the father of Europe, his vision, what we would call the communitarian vision, in contrast to the federalist and the nationalist vision, is such a solution. At least it's a proposition of the solution. Coming back to Schuman, coming back to his ideas. And okay, and when I talk about Robert Schuman, he changed also. Like we can talk about so-called early Hegel and late Hegel, in case of Robert Schuman, also his positions evolved. He was open to the to real life experience, to what he saw. So when I'll be talking about Robert Schuman's vision, this will be the vision of late Schuman, when he retired from direct politics and he kind of contemplated what he and other constructors of the European community achieved just before his death. He wrote his most well-known book and a kind of testament for Europe, yes, in which he expressed his vision, his understanding of Europe, and I will be relying on this chiefly. Okay, so what are the principles of Schumann's vision of Europe? Here I will just concentrate on the quotes. I will give the voice to Schumann himself. I will not impose any interpretations at this time. I just want to give the voice to Robert Schuman. The first quotation is about Christianity. Democracy will be Christian or it won't exist. An unchristian democracy is a caricature which sinks into tyranny or anarchy. The position of democracy can be defined thus. It is impossible for it to accept that the state systematically ignores religious concerns, that opposes them with a bias bordering on hostility or disdain. The state cannot ignore without injustice or damage to itself the extraordinary reality of religious inspiration in the practice of civic virtues, in a very necessary safeguard against forces of social disruption which are present everywhere. Okay, so that would be the first principle. Perhaps at this moment, let me, because some people in Europe nowadays would claim, but we have the separation of church and state. Yes, but Schuman does not undermine this in any way. I like to show this on this simple drawing. If this is a public sphere, and in the public sphere you have a state, understood as understood as government, different levels. You can also have at this public, not private sphere, religion, yes, or church, whatever, in different religious traditions, whatever the names. You'd also have religion in the public sphere. However, you have the separation. It does not mean that the separation of church and state does not mean the exclusion of religion from the public life, or does not have to mean it. At least for Schumann, it did not mean that. Yes, you have both in the public sphere, and this is what he's talking about. You can have both in the public sphere, and still they are separated. Do not violate the basic principle of the achievement of Europe, which is the separation of church and state. Okay. Let me go on with the second principle, patriotism. To our mind, European policy is certainly not in contradiction with the patriotic ideal. It encourages the particular nature and characteristics of each of its states and fosters the sound love for one's own country, which is a love that does not go in detriment of other countries. It wants to attain a unity in the fullness of its diversity. So patriotism would be kind of basic idea, basic principle of Schumann's Europe. I will summarize them, all of them later. Freedom. Freedom, the next basic fundamental principles. It is not possible to apply the term democracy to a regime that refuses to recognize the existence of a people, that is a living community which holds an original heritage with its own aspirations and its own mission that it intends to pursue openly and freely. A government which repudiates the idea even of freedom and personal responsibility, which stifles critical and divergent opinions by violence under the pretext of criminal deviation. In a real democracy, there is only one limit to freedom. The foundation of the state and society must be protected from violence and destructive assaults. In this quotation from Schumann, we clearly see two types of freedom. The democracy, the freedom of a nation. And please notice that it is apparently clear for Schumann that democracy is only viable on the national level, if fully. Yes, because he's talking about a living community which holds an original heritage with its own aspiration and its own mission that it intends to pursue openly and freely. Yes. Second, of course, what we call individual freedoms. Yes, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, which should not be limited in Schumann's vision by anything but just the protection from violence and destructive assaults. No other limits upon freedom. Okay, and the next one, solidarity. This was obvious for Schumann. The law of solidarity between the peoples is a must for the modern conscience. We feel solidarity with one another to maintain peace, to fight poverty, in the respect of treaties, in safeguarding justice and human dignity, or protecting ourselves from aggression. Yes, clearly we had he postulates solidarity between peoples, between nations. He does not restrict himself to just mere solidarity with a nation, but it's a solidarity as a must for the modern conscious solidarity between nations. And finally, diversity. The idea is not to merge states to create a super state. Our European states are a historical reality. From a psychological point of view, it would be impossible to do away with them. Their diversity is a good thing, and we do not intend to level them down or equalize them. I don't want to go into detail about this principle because diversity is misunderstood today. It would require the whole kind of longer comment upon this. Let me just say that what Schuman understands by diversity is not artificial ideological diversity of neo-Marxism, for example, but it's a natural diversity of cultures, religions, ethnic groups. There are customs, there are the traditional natural richness and colorfulness and diversity of human life. This is what he means by diversity. Sorry for coming back for a moment to the Commonwealth to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which lasted 400 years, as I told you at the beginning. This was the real diversity, yes. The Catholics, the Orthodox Christian, the Protestants, the Jews living together, yes, in natural communities, not artificially created diversity, but tolerance and kind of a multi-religious, multi-ethnic community, Republican community of mutual respect and pluralism. And these communities were natural, were traditional ways of life, not kind of ideologically imposed from above. Okay, so diversity. And now let me summarize this. So what the Schumann's vision, which I call in contrast to the federalist vision and the nationalist vision, the communitarian vision, may be summarized by such principles as public Christianity, as patriotism, substantive democracy, strong democracy, real democracy on different levels. Yes, democracy, first of all, philosophically, which understands itself as the expression of the unmeasurable dignity of the human person, not just a formal, procedure of electing the authorities, of voting. In Schumann's vision, democracy is the political expression of the unbelievable and unmeasurable dignity of each and every man and woman, each human person. Yes, so a deep philosophical understanding of democracy, not just formal procedural. Substantive democracy, also democracy on different levels. Yes, democracy starting from the local small communities and up to the European institutions, all the way up to the European institutions. Broad, not limited, in contrast to alternative options, not limited but broad understanding of civil liberties, which are limited only by the concerns of internal and external security. You can't limit, not constrain human freedom because of some ideology of the elites or because of some religion. Yes, human freedom is a value in itself, which should not be limited, constrained. Okay, and next would be solidarity, also broad understanding of solidarity. Solidarity is universal. Solidarity to your neighbor, solidarity to your community, local community, solidarity to your nation, and solidarity to other nations. Yes, there are no limits to solidarity. This is, of course, comes from his Christian perspective that all human beings are brothers and sisters. So there are no limits to solidarity. You cannot constrain it just to certain group. Okay, and diversity. Again, broad diversity. Diversity across Europe. It's for Schumann, it was the value of Europe, the treasure of Europe, that we are different nations. Every nation brings some excellent traditions, customs, beliefs, cultures. This is something unprecedented in the whole world. Europe is so rich, so colorful, so fantastically, beautifully, endowed with different customs, traditions, religious traditions, etc. This is the strength of Europe. As the uniformization of this would be a terrible loss. And now a kind of general picture of the three approaches, the communitarian, federalist, and nationalist vision. We are slowly running out of time, so I won't be going through all of these. I have already discussed the differences. Let me just finish by saying that we believe that the community of European nations, that this communitarian approach, we could go deeper and deeper to its roots. Its personalist approach is an alternative to both federalism and nationalism. And in contrast to them, the communitarian vision is non-ideological. Non-ideological. It respects freedom. It respects diversity. It respects democracy in the broadest possible sense. It respects the public religion, the presence of religion in public life. So it's in contrast to the other vision, it's non-ideological. It rejects abstract concepts and rigid schemes, which do not, in our belief, do justice to the delicate, complex, and diverse reality of Europe. The reality of Europe is that of delicacy. It's a mistake to impose rigid schemes, ideological schemes, upon this delicate, diverse matter as Europe is. It's rooted deeply in the principles of Christian personalism. It stresses relations over institutions, relations over building relations. We start, in Schumann's view, you start with relations. You meet with people of different ethnic, national backgrounds, of different religions, different cultures. You talk to them. You treat them as human beings, as human persons, first of all. And only then, upon this mutual understanding, upon this mutual respect, which you develop in the course of contacts, real life contacts with the people, upon this build institutions, and only upon this. At the same time, Schumann's approach is realistic, it's prudential, and it's internally coherent. We believe that, for example, that if the federalist vision dominates European thinking, it by itself, because it crushes the natural tendency of people to identify, to have identity. People, by their nature, for centuries, people need identity. Religious identity, national identity, other identities. If you try to ideologically crush them, the consequence would be that they will come back. They will come back, but in a kind of perverted form. Yes. So sometimes, let me finish with this. Sometimes when I hear some proponents of this federalist vision in Europe complaining about the rise of national populism and fundamentalism, what I think is, but this is the product of your actions. It is you, by crushing the natural human tendencies, which produce this nationalism or this populism or this fundamentalism. So why you complain? Apparently you need this in a way, and this clash with this nationalist vision. There is a solution, what we believe to the best means to save the project of European integration, and this is the return to the roots, the return to the thought of the father of Europe, one of the leading fathers of Europe, Robert Schuman. Let me finish at this point. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. So now, let's say express the questions. So let's probably develop some certain ideas, so your own, thoughts about that we basically indicated. So what's going on with that? So my suggestion is that because excuse me. Yes, because some of ambassadors need to leave before 12, so the first I suggest to speak would like to ambassador from Turkey. So please, floor is yours. So can you switch on your microphone, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before starting my speech, I would like to thank Institute of Human Thought for organizing this very interesting roundtable and giving us the valuable opportunity to address this distinguished audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe is our home where we are united around common norms, principles, and values of the inviolable and inalienable rights of humanity, freedom, democracy, equality, and the rule of law. Turkey has been an integral part of Europe for centuries, and it will continue to be so. As part of the European family, Turkey not only had an influence on the political, economic, and socio-cultural developments in the continent, but it has also been influenced by them. An overall evaluation of the history of Europe cannot be made without analyzing the role that Turkey played in the continent. As in the past, the destinies of Turkey and other European countries are intertwined. Turkey, in fact, represents the rich and colorful character of Europe. We face the future together. Today, as is known, Turkey is an active member of international organizations such as the Council of Europe, OECD, NATO, OSCE, and a negotiating country with the EU to become a full member. Close relationship with the EU is the fundamental aspect of Turkish foreign policy. On the economic and commercial sphere, Turkey has the customs union with the EU, and more than half of Turkey's foreign trade is with the West European countries. Over 5 million Turkish people live in European countries. Turkish people residing in other European countries are playing increasing roles in the political, economic, cultural, and social lives of these countries where they reside. Turkey-EU relations were initiated in the framework of the association regime based on Ankara Agreement signed in 1963. After the completion of the customs union in 1996 and after Turkey assumed the candidate status during the Helsinki summit in 1999, the EU Council took note that Turkey sufficiently fulfilled the political criteria and decided to open accession negotiations with Turkey on October 3, 2005. Since 2005, we have been continuing to have accession talks with the EU. It has been an arduous journey with difficulties and challenges, but we keep our determination for the end of this process. I would like to underline that the EU membership is a strategic choice for Turkey, and we believe that the conditions will be much more favorable in the future to realize this goal. Distinguished participants, we have multidimensional and deep-rooted relations with the EU, and we are expecting to have stronger cooperation and better engagement with regards to the foreign policy, economy, trade, migration, counterterrorism, and energy issues. We would like to have progress in the accession negotiations. To date, only 16 chapters out of 35 have been opened. 14 chapters are blocked due to the artificially created political arguments. Our main expectation is that the accession negotiations are conducted and concluded as a technical process without being subjected to the political obstacles. We believe that modernizing the customs union will be beneficial for both sides, and lifting visa requirements for Turkish citizens into the Schengen area and opening new chapters in the accession negotiations will give special impetus to regenerate Turkish-EU relations. Today, unfortunately, we are observing with distress that racism, xenophobia, and Islamophobia are unfortunately no longer marginal movements in Europe. Keeping on Turkey's accession process can help in countering these movements and prove that EU is not only a Christian club. As is known, there was a reference to a religious heritage of Europe in the draft 2004 EU Constitution. Europe is a melting pot of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism all together, and each of them contributed to mold the European culture. We don't think that it will be suitable if Europe's identity solely be based on a specific religion, but cultural, humanistic, political, and economic views. In this context, the EU should address Turkey-EU relations with a long-term strategic perspective without being overwhelmed by populist areas and short-sighted political gains. Turkey's accession to the EU will increase the size of the European internal market and strengthen the relative competitiveness of the EU in the global economy. Turkey will constitute a true asset for the Union with its young, educated, and dynamic population, with its reputed position in its region, and with its visionary and multidimensional foreign policy. According to the latest estimations, Turkey is the 70th biggest economy in the world and 6th largest economy in Europe. Alone in the tourism area, more than 40 million visitors per year and more than 30 billion US dollars revenue also per year. Turkey has 350 billion USD dollars trade volume, 17 billion USD dollars foreign direct investment per year. It has successful and distinguished companies worldwide, For instance, Turkish Airlines flies more countries than any other airlines in the world. Last but not least, having the sixth largest diplomatic network in the world, Turkey will have substantial contributions to Europe. For this reason, the EU cannot be influential power in its foreign policy with keeping Turkey out. EU should decide what kind of Europe is desired in the future: introvert and timid Europe or extrovert and active Europe, a federalist one, a confederalist one. For instance, if the EU decides to take a more active stance on Middle Eastern affairs, it will be Turkey that would be helpful in achieving these goals. The EU will gain more strategical upper hand and importance with Turkey's presence. For instance, I'm going to give the example of Syria. There were many actors in Syria except Europe, but Europe influence was subjected to the damages, collateral damages, or other types of actions stemming from the Syrian crisis. Others were present, defining the future of Syria one way or another. Europe stood still, but this is today an important topic for Europe, the question of refugees and other topics related to the Syrian crisis. In this regard, we sincerely advocating that with its special geostrategic position and broad economic potential, accession of Turkey to the European Union will yield concrete benefits. Turkey's accession to the EU will bring an added value to the Union, not a burden. Carrying forward this relationship with the ultimate goal of membership is a strategic importance for both Turkey and the EU for the sake of future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. So now I think and I hope the Danish ambassador would like to speak out something. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to the Institute of Schumann and to the Foreign Ministry for organizing this event and for inviting me. I think that it's always valuable to take a broader and a deeper look at developments, and that's perhaps where academics and think tanks have a comparative advantage, because you can, so to speak, get into the helicopter, you can take that broader view, whereas diplomats like myself, we tend to be at the conference table. We are just very focused on the present day agenda. I think that's the difference. So I think it's good, it's inspiring, it's interesting to hear the thought that we have just been explained. Now, but as I said, we diplomats, we are at the conference table, so we take a look at what is on the present day agenda. And I think if you would ask Danes, if you would ask the Danish government, they would say, well, in this particular situation where we are now, there's one overriding priority, and that's to keep the European Union together. That's the starting point. We need to, whatever we do, this is where we need to start. So this is the number one priority for my government, for a broad majority in the Danish Parliament. We need to because, as you said, something serious has happened. The UK is leaving us. That's very serious for us. It's our closest ally. So don't do anything that will make things worse. So that's the starting point.
Mr. Ambassador, don't you mind to speak closer to the microphone,
sure,
please?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Having said that, so just to make that point very, very clear, we need, whatever we do, we need to stay united. We need to stay united in the European Union. So that's the number one Danish priority in the present situation. And we don't think that the European Union at this point should engage in new ambitious integration projects. Instead, we should focus on delivering concrete results that would have an impact on ordinary citizens, because that's what they expect. They don't expect grandiose ideas, a new integration project. They want governments to do something that has a concrete and very specific impact on their daily life. That's on migration, that's on security, that's on jobs, that's on growth. And there will be a lot of discussions in the coming few months about the future of the European Union. We are in the beginning of that reflection process, so it's probably too early to predict the outcome. And we don't see any need for changing the decision-making processes in the European Union. We have a system that works. It might not be perfect, but it's actually delivering results. Just Thursday, Friday, there was a very successful European Council meeting, probably the best for many months. So the system is actually working. So that's important to keep that in mind. And it's important that the system will deliver, as I said, concrete results. We're saying that the Commission should be big on big things. So if it's a big problem, the Commission and the European institutions, they should be big. But if it's small things, they should be small. And we are not interested in changing the institutional setup as it is right now. It might not be perfect, but it's working. And the final point that we have been making over and over again, and this is perhaps something that somehow relates to the broader and the more general thoughts of Schuman, we have a strong belief in the role of the national parliaments. And you're probably not all familiar with the kind of system that we have in Denmark, but it's probably the EU nation where the national parliament has the strongest role. And it has been like that since the very first day we entered the European communities way back in history in 1972. The national parliament in our system is the one giving the mandate. No Danish minister, no Danish government, no Danish head of state can attend an EU meeting without a strong and specific mandate from the European Committee of the Danish Parliament. And that keeps, I think, a very good link between what is happening in Brussels, what is happening in the European institutions, and everyday life in Denmark. Because Danes would know that when a Danish minister, when a Danish head of state is attending a meeting, will be based on a mandate that is given by the Danish Parliament. And I think that's something that we want to keep, and within the existing treaties, and there's a lot of scope for doing that. There's a lot of scope within the existing treaties for making that link even stronger. And this is something that we want to do, and we are very happy to share the experience that we have and sharing it with other countries. So once again, thank you for inviting me. Sorry I have to leave before the meeting is over, but my colleague will be present during the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we are gathering basically, getting an impression about what Schuman was thinking about. And first of all, he was successful over a few decades. And the last decades, as we see, they are, as my colleague said, terrible crash. Why the UK is going out? Because we are probably heading in not that direction what Schuman was thinking about. So, UK joined the European Economic Union, not the European Union. UK joined the European Economic Union in 1973. Last joined, first out. Last in, first out. LIFO. We say in the business, right? In the warehousing, LIFO. So it means something. So it means that the UK is not only not satisfied because of the economic, gains or profits. The people are not satisfied because of not probably, developing the relationship on this, people by people level, heart to heart, right? So this is I am not basically contradicting that what you said, But, we need to ask the question why we observe over last decades big problems. So we need to conclude, draw the conclusion about that. Of course, not in a revolutionary way. That's important. But in some evolutionary way. Okay? So let me just ask to a floor Professor Sakowicz from the university, Warsaw University. What would you like, to say in relation to that, topic?
Okay.
You can sit down.
Now, a few words I will tell standing and then I will sit down. It is very nice for me to be here. I'm very happy. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me and thank you very much for your invitation to participate in this round table. And I am very grateful to you, my colleague. You please forgive me. So I tell to you, my colleague, that you told about Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, because roots of my family is there in Vilnius city, and I felt today like at home. And thanks a lot. And some personal words. You can find in my family people of different cultures and religions and nationalities. The beginning of my family is in Polish Vilnius. Yes, today it is Lithuanian capital of the city, but for many years it was a Polish city, and we should tell about difficult subjects during our meetings. And today, in my family, you can find Roman Catholics, Orthodox, and also you can find Jewish, and you can find also Belarusians, Ukrainians, people of different cultures and religions, and I am really very happy that we are one in diversity. And I was listening to your speech about communitarian vision of Robert Schuman and about community of nations, and I was thinking then about Communio Personarum of John Paul II. And maybe one day I will start to compare thoughts of Robert Schuman and thoughts John Paul II. I think that they are brothers, maybe neighbors, maybe brothers. And today I heard from your excellencies and from you some words. Religion, culture, and others. And I would like to tell you now a few words about dialogue and identity. You just finished your speech about the importance of identity. Yes, I work at Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński University here in Warsaw, and I am interested for many years in interreligious, intercultural dialogue. And I'm really very happy that I can meet people of different cultures and religions. And my subject is dialogue and identity, and I prepared my speech on this paper, and I will read a few words what I just prepared. In popular parlance, the word dialogue means conversation, particularly between two people. Yes, we tell about dialogue, and you have written state, religion, but we should remember that there is no dialogue between religions. It is impossible to lead dialogue between religions. Yes, it is possible to dialogue. People of different religions, they can participate in dialogue. People who work in the field of state, there is not state. I think that religion without people is not religion. And then a dialogue, the most important is a dialogue between two people. Having its roots in Greek culture, the term dialogue originally also meant a form of literary expression, in form of conversation between two or more people. And we should remember that people, a man is the most important. A man is the most important in Europe. A woman, a man, and people, we are the most important in Europe. Dialogue understood in such a way found in expression in a literary or philosophical work written in the form of a conversation. I decided to tell about dialogue and identity because, for me, Robert Schuman is a teacher, is a professor who taught us to be faithful to our identities. Today, many people who believe in God, they don't tell publicly because they're ashamed. They are afraid what the other person will think about me. And I think that Robert Schuman was a great teacher for me, to be faithful to my identity. One could suppose that the notion of dialogue should play a key role in the history and culture of the West, starting from the times of Plato. However, after a thorough study of the history of the idea of dialogue, it does not turn out to be this way. The Greco-Roman world, and therefore Christianity, embedded it in this cultural milieu. Judaism present in the West from the time antiquity began, as well as Islam, which started to penetrate in the world already in the 7th century after Christ, wanting to be in the West like it was at home in the East, was far away from actualizing the idea of dialogue. People choose monologue, and I think that it is also today. For centuries, we choose a monologue, and I think this is a great danger to choose monologue in Europe. Subsequently, building walls of prejudice, and for me, these ideas you showed us, nationalism, is a big wall of prejudice, and people choose monologue. We were building walls of prejudice, and furthermore, we created in ourselves the fear of strangers. Humanity called to dialogue lived in monologues and even assigned to the monologue a sort of cultic status. The full truth of history would not to be told if we tried to convince everyone around that the idea of dialogue emerged from the ashes of forgetfulness only toward the end of the 20th century. Likewise, the entire history of mankind, the history of cultures and religions up to 20th century cannot be called the anti-dialogue epoch. We found in the history of Christianity, many teachers of dialogue, for example, St. Francis of Assisi, and also Mother Teresa of Calcutta, John Paul II, and also Robert Schuman. People of various cultures and religions lived on their own for many years, for many centuries, carefully guarding their yards, viewing everyone else coming into their yard as a threat toward their own identity. We are afraid of people of different cultures. We are afraid of people of different religions. There is only one generation now of people who reached a mature age and for whom the idea of dialogue became a normal word, and who can use it without fear or reservations or without being accused of heresy. After years of mankind's terrible dramas, and we should remember in our Europe about our dramas, about our history, after years of mankind's terrible dramas, which occurred in the 20th century, such as the October Russian Revolution, the German Nazi era, the Second World War, the time of the Iron Curtain, and the absolute Cold War, the world dialogue became one of the challenges of modern times and mankind. We should remember, and I think that many politicians in Europe, they don't know history. Maybe many of them, or they don't want to tell about history. But we should remember it. Dialogue challenges religion and cultures, nations to come out of the security of their yards. It also means overcoming distrust and a liberation from complexes. Dialogue enables us to understand the past as well as the future, marked by the spirit of openness. It is the way to one's salvation and to the removal of the threat of self-destruction. Dialogue means creativity. And now a few words about identity. What does it mean identity? I told you, and now I stress again, that Robert Schuman and people who were not ashamed of their Christianity, they loved their identity. What does it mean? The popular definition of identity presented in the common language is also as simple as the definition of dialogue. Identity means being the same, sameness. Even a quick look at the shortest definition of the terms dialogue and identity leads to a deeper conclusions. Since dialogue is a conversation between two people, it is likewise a meeting of two identities, two different samenesses, which have the highest right to be, that what and who they are. Dialogue supposes identity, not being oneself, not being the same, meaning gifting up identity and also authenticity, preventing one from engaging in dialogue. He who surrenders his own identity in order to win the favor of the partner in dialogue is the greatest obstacle and threat to dialogue. One cannot march to the beat of a different drummer. Once engaged in dialogue, one cannot say only that which the other side wants to hear. I think that is a great problem of our days, because we tell these things which our partner wants to hear. This is not a way to the future of Europe. In dialogue, one cannot dance into the rhythm imposed by the partner. I heard many music from Western Europe, from different parts of Europe, and they tell me, please dance this music. I don't want to dance this music. This is not my music. I am free. I have my own dignity. I am a Christian. Yes, I am a Christian. Some years ago, our Minister of Polish Higher Education told, please don't tell your students because you are a Christian. Why can I not tell? If I will tell you that I am Christian, it is against democracy? I think that it is a democracy. It is a full of democracy. I am not afraid of my identity. And I think that today I am really very happy, because today I have a new teacher, Robert Schuman. For many years, my teacher was John Paul II, and now I have them too. And now I will finish. Dialogue is a meeting between two distinct individuals. The condition for a good dialogue is respect for one's identity and for the identity of the other party engaged in dialogue. Dialogue doesn't mean raising a toast or having a big party with a lavishly prepared banquet. Dialogue includes hardships and effort in order to become more oneself and also to better understand the other. And I think this is our way in Europe. We should love ourselves. This is a Christian command. You please love yourself, and then you should love your neighbors. And for me, it is very important. I should be this person who I am, and this is a mission in Europe. I think this is my words which I wanted to share with you, and thank you for your attention, and thank you that you wanted to listen to me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Professor. Really, it was very interesting to me. The dancing, explained us by, pictures, your very deeply thoughts. And I would like you to add to that. So the Schumann, Robert, this is a really good, point. The Schumann is not known today. We do the different analysis within the students, politicians, different, groups of people. Schumann is not known. If he was fruitful after the Second War, so let know him, let be acquainted with him, and try ask the question, can he be fruitful again? I think he can. But if we don't know him, how we can, grasp his ideas? So currently we started to have some speeches over the radio in Chicago. And could you imagine, after first speech, 30 minutes, we got, thousands of calls. People wondering that he discovered the Schumann again. He said he was surprised that the Schumann is like that, what we presented. He thought the Schumann is somebody who was, leading this Europe to the disruption, to the bankruptcy. And as we, observe the, summit in 25th of March in Rome, nobody said any word about Schumann. Nobody said any word about Adenauer. Nobody said any word about de Gasperi. The fathers of these fundaments, which were fruitful. So the mission of the Institute of Schumann thought is just rather not to deliver some new philosophy. The mission of our institute is to trigger, to incentive the interest of the people in every country to start again to learn the Schumann. So let's join our forces, together. Let's join, to that activity. So, and we hope, that this will be, a very fruitful. I have in the university all students from all over the world. Have many lectures in English, from France, from the Danish students, Dutch, everywhere. They don't know the Schumann. French students don't know the Schumann. Thank you very much, representative from Luxembourg. Thank you. Schumann is yours. Schumann is France. There is not present Mr. Ambassador Nickel, but he got the excuse because he was present at our first meeting. He joined our society. He said, yes, we need to, deliberate about Schumann. So, Ambassador of France promised to come for the next meeting like that. Thank you, you are here, Danish ambassador. So now I would like to ask for a few words the president of the Schumann Foundation, Anna Radwan. She's here, right? So Schumann Foundation is working, acting, operating in Poland around, I think, 15 years, right? The Institute of Schumann Thought, which I am representing, which I am a president of that, institute, is just acting since 1 year. So be so kind, to share your impressions.
Thank you, Mr. Professor. So I think I have just 3 minutes to introduce our foundation. Schumann Foundation was launched not 15 years ago, more than this, in 1991. So it was really more than 15 years. And I would like to stress that it was launched by Tadeusz Mazowiecki, and he had this idea that the Schumann Foundation will launch the debate of European Union on European values and future membership of Poland in EU. So we are quite an old and experienced organization. Mr. Professor mentioned I'm the president, not anymore, not for 2 years now. I'm still the member of the council. Here with me is Inga Kamocka from the foundation. She is the coordinator of many projects. For instance, you mentioned that the Schumann is not very well known in Poland. Each year we organize the Schumann Parade, which actually has been in Poland for about 20 years now. And each year we have thousands of people marching for Europe. Of course, this is on the anniversary of Schuman Plan. This week, for instance, together with Madam President Gronkiewicz-Waltz, we will introduce the new place in Warsaw, the roundabout of Robert Schuman. Iga will tell you maybe more during the coffee break where it is. Everybody's inviting. So we are trying to do all the best to not only to promote the idea of Robert Schuman, but also to encourage young people, journalists, different societies, different also political groups to European debate. 2 years ago, we published this book about Schuman. Here you can find the text about his religion, about his vision of federalism. I don't have much time, but I don't agree with Mr. Filipiak with his idea of federalization of Schuman. I think he was really federalist, and you can see it during his political career. Also, you can read it in this book. So we are very happy that the Institute of Schuman Thought is our younger brother. Can we call you like this? And I hope we can collaborate in the future fruitfully, talking not only about the federalization, but also about the European project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. So now I think I would suggest, we start the coffee break, right? And after the coffee break, we'll continue the discussion or just sharing our thoughts around the topic. And so be some kind to, the coffee break, and the coffee is around here. So I suggest as well we'll share our thoughts, bilaterally, during the coffee break. And regarding, the coffee break. The coffee is just outside behind the door, right? So regarding the conference press, I'm sorry I just misspelled that there will be not any conference press. I just was misspelling or just stated wrong. So just we will continue after. I don't know how we'll just dedicate for a coffee break. How we initially planned the coffee break was planned for around 15 to 20 minutes, right? So thank you very much indeed.